life in your 20s can feel like a make or break time. You struggle finding the right partner, the right job, the right place to live in. So, are your 30s the new 20s? And if so, what should you be doing to set yourself up for success? Hi guys, this is Bri, your host. Welcome to You're Not Doing It Wrong, where we talk about the many troubling topics of today's millennials and discuss how to navigate your next quarter-life crisis, because we're all too busy thinking about what we should be doing and not what we want to do.
And I'm your co-host, Ally. Welcome back to Season 2.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. First of all, we want to say we are so sorry for being a week late. We were traveling for Thanksgiving, and we did not plan accordingly. Yeah. So please forgive us. But we are back. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, to make up for it, we're going to have a juicy episode this week. It's nice. And
next week, we'll have a juicy episode next week. We are back, and this is our first book club episode ever.
Yep.
That I'm really excited about because I read the book. Bri did not read the book. But just to preface it, this will be a 2-part episode. So we're going to be talking about the first part of the book. So I actually read, I'm like, where did I put it? It's called The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now. And it's by Meg J.
This book was actually originally published in 2012, which is kind of a long time ago already. Mm-hmm. And this is actually the updated version. Mm-hmm. So there's an older version than this. And Ally read that it was actually published in 2021, this newer version.
Yeah, the new version was published in 2021, which is okay. But from what I can tell from the book, there wasn't that much that was like updated. So I don't know.
I wonder what they updated, like the stats maybe?
She mentioned, I don't think it's the stats. She mentioned in the book, it was like the social media. There's like a social media aspect that.
So they added a chapter.
That she was like talking about Facebook originally, and then she kind of updated it to be more about Instagram. I don't know, because I only read the first half. So this will be the first half of the book, but basically the intro kind of talks about like, are your 30s the new 20s? So they kind of start off talking about this theory of like 30s are your new 20s and what that looks like. And they talk about like the reason behind this being that, you know, modern day society, people are less likely to get married and have kids in their 20s now than they were before.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So that's why this concept of like 30s being your new 20s became like a whole thing.
Right. Because I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I think there's like a higher educational rate now, right? Mm-hmm. Like more people go to college versus like before there was less people going to college. So your next step was literally marriage, kids, family, job. Yeah. A lot of people made a career out of their first job and they stayed there versus like nowadays it's more convenient for most of us to go to college, right? Mm-hmm. To delay this idea of like starting our careers. And then even more so now, I would say, a lot of people end up going to further their education.
Grad school
past
stuff,
yeah, grad school. You're talking, you know, some people just, I don't know, other than grad school. Yeah. I mean, there's
different avenues, and the book is written kind of interestingly. So like it's a therapist that's writing it, and she talks about, which I was like wondering recently, how she's able to talk about these stories, because I'm like, patient client confidentiality.
I guess if there's no name associated with it, right?
There are names, but I guess she probably like switched the names. I don't know. So she talks about, you know, like in the past, one of the clients, like her parents, you know, would go and like get married right away, and they had her really young, and how now your 20s are just kind of this like unknown, uncertain time where you have all of these options and it feels all confusing, and that we have nothing to kind of like guide us. So we don't have any like mile markers anymore when we're in our 20s. Mm-hmm. Once you graduate, so no like grades, no next level, you know, that kind of stuff.
You're kind of at a like standstill. So like if you don't go to grad school, you're like, what's my accomplishment? Mm-hmm. I feel like that's definitely something that I felt when we first got out of school, and I think we've talked a little bit about this before, but when I first graduated, I felt like, okay, so obviously our mile marker is like getting the job out of college, right? Yeah. Like any job at this point, just like give me a job and require that it has a degree, because otherwise I spent 4 years doing nothing, right? But anyways, like that was like the one thing. And then like once you get it, you're like, is this job good enough? Mm-hmm. Right? There's this idea of like, am I doing good enough in your 20s? But everyone's at such a different pace because, like you said, there's so many different options. So it's like, who do I compare myself to? And I feel like at the beginning we were like comparing ourselves to people we graduated with, and then slowly,
there's a part in the book about that.
slowly and surely, I was like, I don't know, like people just started venturing off to do different things. Like I knew people when we first graduated that did go to grad school, so now I was like, am I supposed to be in grad school, right?
Yeah.
And then there were other people's that we like that I knew from high school, right, my age, who were full blown families, like 3 kids in, and I'm like, what the fuck, like.
I saw a TikTok about that the other day.
Nowhere near that.
About like when you're in your 20s and some people are getting married and having kids, but you're still a baby. Like,
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's
I'm
literally
still a child. I'm a 27-year-old baby. Like, I'm barely learning how to cook now. Like,
no, literally. So the whole point of it is like it's divided into different sections. And the first section after the introduction is work. It's literally just called work.
just work.
Just work. What I found interesting is that literally she talks about the this idea of something called identity capital.
Identity capital. Okay.
She describes it as being like life experiences that may or may not go on a resume, but that move you forward in life. And so, you know, typical ones would be like your degree, your work experience, but other things are like people you know, how you solve problems, like experiences that you've done that don't go on a resume. The whole point of like this idea is that you should be looking for a job that has a lot of identity capital
that'll like move you further along in life, basically.
Yeah, which I found interesting because I feel like when we first graduated, it was like, how do we know if this job is a good one? And nobody was able to be like,
it's a good
yes or no.
I mean, they were just like, most of the time, and I think in general, even sometimes now, most people are like, it's a good job if it pays well. Right? Like there's never, and that's like, we've talked about this in the past, but I think there's so much more to jobs, especially in your early 20s, that people don't talk about, right?
Yeah.
We should be talking about how it, like people are always like, oh yeah, professional development, but what really is professional development?
Oh yeah, I
right?
used to wonder.
Defining that, like,
it's like when people used to tell you, ask questions during an interview, and you're like, what do I ask?
Right. And nobody gave us a course over like, what are the right questions to ask? I think now looking at it like identity capital, I'm thinking like, especially now that I'm like about to hit 30, right? But like, I actually know what I should be looking for in a job, right? Like the working from home, like getting to network across the country, like something like working local is great if you're trying to have a job that's locally based. But if you're somebody who wants to like move out of the country, move out of the state, you should be looking at jobs that are international. You should be looking at companies that are international.
Yeah.
You can't expect to work locally and end up, you know, moving states, because it's just not realistic.
It just ends up being a lot harder.
It makes it harder because it's the people, like you said, like the people that you know that can push you in a different direction. So I don't think I got that until I was like 25. I started working for like a national organization that really like expanded my horizons in the sense that like I was working with people from like Georgia. I was working from people, but point being is like there was tons of meetings where I was meeting other people who weren't just Texas based.
Yeah.
Right. It was like meetings that were like with other people out of state, which I was like, okay, this might not be as helpful because like I can never see you. We're not going to be friends. But then I started thinking to myself, like, no, because this actually leads for me to give me options outside of the state if I ever did want to move.
That's something that I don't think we thought about a lot after college.
Absolutely not.
People just kind of were like, if you get a job, then you're doing great. Like,
I think the only thing I thought about was pay. Like, I was like, this isn't enough.
I don't even think I thought about that because at the time, like we graduated in 2019, I feel like being underpaid right out of college was like the norm.
Yeah.
So people were like, it's okay. Like you'll move up. You have to like do your time first. And now I'm like,
I still think that's
crazy.
General sentiment across the board. This idea of like having to do your time. But I think, I mean, we've talked about this previously, but I think we both have very different perspectives on life. And I feel like for me, that was the biggest one, is like money. If money is not, if I'm not balling, and I was balling on a budget, but not balling, then I haven't made it yet, right? Quote unquote, I haven't made it yet. So I think
then
that was
other people are like, you're doing so good because you have a job right out of college.
Right. And they were like, you're doing amazing work. You're
doing amazing, sweetie.
This is like meaningful work. You know, that was like the biggest thing that I remember talking to some of my buddies who were like in engineering and working like corporate jobs in the beginning. They were like, but you're doing meaningful work, and that's important. And I realize that now, right? Because like now I work corporate and I don't really consider what I do meaningful work now, but I get why people in that position would have been like, hey, you've made it. Like, you've done a good job. And I mean, that first job I had came with a lot of different benefits. The fact that we were able to travel together in the summer, the fact that they put us up in a hotel for training,
the stipend at the
end that helped me pay off the one loan that I had for school. Like, all of those things, in my perspective, are benefits of the job. But I wouldn't, even then, in that aspect, with all those benefits, like, I was like, I haven't made it yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were getting paid peanuts.
Peanuts, literally,
Peanuts.
yeah. And we were expected to work,
a lot.
An equivalent of maybe 50 hours a week.
Yeah.
Because we had to meet a certain amount of hours for the stipend.
Yeah.
Which I think was like 50 hours.
Which is crazy now that I think about that, because I'm like, that's so fucked up that a 40-hour-a-week job isn't enough for something like that.
I think this idea that, like, and it was an AmeriCorps job. I'm going to put them on the spot because I really do think there needs to be more regulation around it.
There should be,
Teach for America, AmeriCorps, like, those are great jobs. They're government-related jobs. They, receive some type of grants from the government. But the amount of, like, mental, what is it called? Exhaustion and, like, what it costs you to be able to work these types of jobs is absolutely insane. Like, we went to a conference that first year when I was part of the AmeriCorps group, and they literally were like, most of you should be able to qualify for
like food stamps, right?
Food stamps, like state benefits, based on the fact that you get paid so poorly. Like, that was ridiculous.
Which is sad, because I'm like, all of those people, you have to have a college degree,
right? And a lot of those people, and this is what I always come back to, is like, so most of these people were first generation. They were like, great, you're a first gen student, so you can relate to other first gen students and help them get to school. Well, that's great, but what are we actually showing them, right? Showcasing them that you can go to college, do your 4 years, get a degree, and still end up back in the same spot where you're on benefits.
Right.
Even though you grew up on benefits, and the whole point of you going to college was to get off of benefits. You know what I'm saying? So it was a shitty program. Like, Identity Capital, sure, we met a lot of great people, but there are also their downfalls. But I think it did, I will say, I feel like it provided a good foundation for Identity Capital to start off with.
Think,
especially
looking back, you probably did get a lot of identity capital from it. And so essentially the point of that chapter is, like, if you don't know what job to take, go for the one that you think is going to get you the most identity capital.
Yeah.
She talks about an example of, like, this client that she had that was trying to go back to, or she kept saying she wanted to go back to grad school.
Okay.
And when she was applying to grad schools, the only thing that she had on her resume was this job where she worked, like, out in the wilderness with these, like, teenagers that were pretty much, like, in the juvie system that have gotten in trouble.
Oh my gosh.
And they would do, like, all of these crazy things out in the wilderness. And she was, like, a camp counselor. And so she talks about, like, this job and how it was, like, super crazy, but she loved it because she got to meet all these people and she felt like she was helping them even though she didn't get paid. So then she was like, oh, I can't apply to grad school because I don't have anything to put on my resume. And all these people, like, went to
Ivy League
schools, and they're going to be, like, better than me. Well, then when she went in for the interviews for her grad school, everybody was like, oh, you're that one girl that did this program or whatever it was called. And so she's like, the identity capital that she gained from that ended up getting her into grad school. And, like, now she's doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting because I was like, I've never thought about jobs in, like, a different way, because I feel like you always think, like, oh, well, this job is sucky.
I feel like I've thought like that since I was in my 20s, like, early, as soon as I got out of school. I think in the beginning I was like, yes, I'm getting paid peanuts, but I have a network now in San Antonio. Then on top of that, the fact that I was still, like, connected to my alma mater made me feel better, because I was like, maybe I can meet other people from my alma mater that will help me accelerate in my career. So I feel like it still provided some type of, like, in general, it was like a network, like, but the biggest stamp of approval was the AmeriCorps, right? And there's people that, like, still look at my resume and see that because there's, like, national membership affiliation, and it's like, I did a year in AmeriCorps. People see that and immediately are like, oh,
just same example as the book, kind of like, oh, you're that one AmeriCorps girl. Like,
you were able to do a year, even if it's just a year of hard ass work, right? Of work that's underpaid, understaffed, and then it's like, it's like nonprofit related work, right?
Yeah.
This is stuff that, like, is meaningful work, and people are like, you could put her anywhere and she would probably be able to do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I really do think that name carries weight. And so, to some extent.
I agree. Well, then I was trying to think too while I was reading this book, because we'll get to it at the end. Like, I feel like the whole point of these book club episodes are like, do I recommend the book? Yes or no? And I think for somebody that's 27, like, I'm reading and thinking,
I wish somebody would have said this to me before.
Like I wish I would have read this earlier. And the whole reason that we wanted to go back and do this is because I feel like I have so many self-help books on our shelf. We've never read them.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I need to read all of these. I'm 27. I'm literally going to turn 28 next month. So I'm like, I got to read all these books about being in your 20s before I turn 30. I got 2 years.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's important to hear these things because I think nobody really says them.
Yeah.
So unless you've like grown up with somebody who knows like how to navigate it, or you yourself like go out of your way to read a self-help book and like learn, it's going to be hard for you to know like, yes, maybe, because like I think sometimes we get stuck in this like immediate gratification, right? A lot of us get stuck, especially in our day and age in modern day.
You're jumping ahead, Bri.
Oh, I'm sorry. Like
it's okay. Continue.
We get into this idea of like immediate gratification, and we're just like, we need the coolest job, the best job. We need the one that pays the most right here, right now. And by doing that, you skip all the like levels of trying to get to your ultimate goal.
Yes. Well, there's a chapter in this work section called The Search for Glory. And it talks about kind of like social media and things like that, and how like we just compare ourselves and we think like
LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly. Like the example she uses is this client that comes in and she's like, I just feel so behind because, you know, like I saw this post by my friend and he's doing like Doctors Without Borders and like helping these kids in Africa. And then she's like, do you want to help kids in Africa and like be a doctor? And the girl's like no. And then she's like, then why do you feel the need to compare yourself to him? Like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really relatable. Like, we sit here and we're like, oh, well, I feel like I do that a lot too. I'm like, oh my God, well, she's doing so much better because she's doing all this stuff. And then Bri's like, you don't even want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you have to put yourself in those shoes. But would you actually do that? Right? Like, given the chance, would you actually do that? And I feel like that really helps me stay grounded because even though, you know, we have amazing friends doing amazing things, but at the same time, I'm like, if I were in those shoes,
like, would I actually be happy?
Yeah. Would I still even love the job? Would I still even like the job? You know?
But I feel like this is such a big piece of your 20s too. Like you get out of college or you get into the workforce and you start looking at everybody else thinking, oh, well, they just have this perfect life and I'm not doing that.
I try to remember that, especially, I mean, we've talked a lot about Instagram and like pictures and just social media in general. Like you always have to stop and remind yourself, like, what is this picture not telling me? Right? You're not telling me.
Should have used that in the last picture episode. Picture didn't happen.
Hey, I mean, hopefully they're still listening and they're listening to this episode. But yeah, like, what is this picture? What is this video not telling me? Right? Because the funny part is, like, anytime I do anything like a trend or like a fucking recipe off of TikTok, they didn't tell me that you could fuck something up and that it needed not to do this or that. It's the same thing, right? Like when you see a picture, they're not telling you the argument they had before the concert, before they took those couple pictures. They're not going to show you the fact that their tire blew hours out a week on the way to wherever they fucking traveled. They're not telling you that they had to pay an extra $600 at the hotel because they broke, you know, like there's so many things that like obviously don't make it to the internet. Even when you get a new job, they're not telling you that their boss fucking sucks and they're mean and like they're working extra hours trying to keep up because somebody on their team isn't, you know, contributing to the way there's so many things like that obviously nobody's going to post about.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I even think about like myself, and I was a reporter for 5 seconds out of college.
I would say it's more than 5 seconds considering they were working your ass to the bone, but
that too. Like I was so excited to post about it, and like then I posted about it once about getting the job, and then I never posted about it again because I'm like, I'm working over 40 hours. I'm literally getting paid $20K. I'm traveling over 30 minutes outside of the city to do this job, and it's so stupid and meaningless and pointless, and I like hate my life. I hate my boss. Like so then I'm like, I think about that all the time and how. Well, yeah, on the surface, if somebody were to click on my page and be like, oh, she's cool, she's a reporter, like to them, it might be like, oh my gosh, she's doing such a great job. But to me, I'm like, I'm literally drowning.
Cool job.
Like,
yeah. Mentally, it's just not there. And that's what it really comes down to. It boils down to like, I wish somebody would tell you early on, you know, when you're hitting your 20s, when you're getting out of school or whatever, you know, you're getting ready to start your life, is, are you happy? Right? Like these are the questions that I wish people would ask. Are you happy? Not, are you paid well? Are you, you know, working in your field? Are you, you know, do you have a boyfriend? Like, who cares if you have a boyfriend? Are you happy, right? Like, are you happy with yourself? Do you know yourself, right? Are you learning about yourself? Those are the real questions we should be asking because that is really, in your 20s, that's what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
It's learning how to be happy on your own or learning how to be happy in general with your life, the way that your life is. And then also just like learning about yourself because you're a whole different person in your 20s than you were when you were in high school, when you were in college.
Yeah.
Like, that's a whole different version of yourself that
never existed. Yeah.
I mean, they existed, right? But like, they don't exist now, right? They aren't going to continue to exist. You have to choose to build a new identity based on other things that are going to happen in your 20s.
Yeah, I think there's an example. I don't know if it's in this chapter or a different one, but it's in the work section where like a client wants to move back home and she's like from a small city, but she moved to a big city and she kept saying it, but then she kept saying like, but if I move, I feel like
you lose that identity.
I failed, right?
Yeah.
Like, why move back to my home city when there's really, I'm working what people would consider a good job here. But she didn't like
successful.
Her job. Yeah. Right. And so then she ended up doing it. Like, she got a new job. She ended up moving back home and she like sent the author of the book an email saying like, I'm so much happier. And the whole point of the conversation with this client was like, are you happy? If you're not happy, then do what makes you happy. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And I was like, that's deep.
I think we get stuck in this idea of like, what is success, right? Like, what are people going to perceive as success? Because that's what's most important to us, is what other people think. And I mean, I'm guilty of it. I think we all are. I think you are, myself, for like sure, everyone I know. But it really just comes down to that. I think when we learn to accept like that we can choose our happiness versus like what other people think our life should look like, it really goes a longer way, because it only sets you up to continue to learn, continue to actually build the correct kind of, not the correct, but like to build the success that you actually are going to enjoy.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can be successful and not enjoy it. Finding success where you enjoy your life, where you enjoy the success, where you can actually like celebrate it, right? Because if you don't enjoy it and you're not celebrating it, you're just doing the points.
Yeah. You know, well, going back a couple of chapters off topic, still related to work. There's like a whole chapter about being like underemployed and unemployed.
Underemployed and unemployed.
Okay. And she says, you know, this conversation that people in their 20s are very often either unemployed or underemployed. And underemployed being you have a degree, but you're working like a part-time job or, you know, something like that. And how in your 20s you tend to think like, oh, it's okay because I'll catch up later. But she gives all these statistics that I didn't include in the notes because that's too much to read.
Read the book if you want the stats.
Want the stats. I'm not going to read it word for word about how people who are underemployed for too long in their 20s or unemployed for too long in their 20s tend to be really behind than others who aren't. And so you're never going to catch up. And then she gives an example that like,
that's really depressing.
That's why I'm saying like reading this book now makes me even more depressed because I'm like, damn. And so she talks about an example of like in your 40s, your salary tends to cap. So once you hit 40, that's kind of going to be like the most that you're making.
Let's go.
Okay.
I said, if we can just get those costs to go down, that'd be great.
As if. And so she gives that example that, you know, once you reach your 40s, your salary starts to cap and that's the most that you're going to be making, and how people still feel behind because they're just playing catch up, you know?
Got it. Yeah. I mean, that sucks to hear, I think, as somebody who is struggling, not myself, but like for our listeners who are maybe considered unemployed or underemployed. Like I said, not to put my brother in the spot, right? But like my other brother who's barely now finishing up school, like I feel like he's always going to feel that way. Like he's going to be behind to some extent because he was delayed. My sister even, right? Like she started her family. I don't know if she'd feel behind, maybe behind in her career, but not behind in life.
Yeah.
Because you got a head start on
personal life. Yeah.
On personal life, right? She's now married and has her kid and like,
shout out to Monica.
And so I don't know. I think it really just depends on the perspective too, right? Like if your work isn't like everything to you, and that's the main thing, right? Like if I'm thinking about this chapter is like, if your career or your job isn't your main source of identity, then you're not behind, right? Like there's other things that you get to celebrate and say like, but I've excelled in XYZ. I've excelled in my personal life. I've excelled in my family life. I've excelled in, I don't know what else there is, but in my hobbies, right? Like if there's people who are like very committed to hobbies and stuff, like there may be other things that you're excelling in. I think that's hard for people in their 20s because I think people, quote unquote, society, right, doesn't appreciate or provide value to those other things.
I agree. So I mean,
especially as a woman,
I feel like that was a hard chapter for me to read personally because I felt similar, and I was thinking about that a lot when I was reading that chapter. I was like, I'm about to have a panic attack. But
it's okay, baby.
she also talks about kind of like going back to the life capital and getting experience in other ways. So whether it's like volunteering or, you know, like different things like that. And that the reason that people feel like they can't maybe get like a full-time job or one that's in their field is because nowadays there are like so many options. So it's like back what we said, like you could either go to grad school or you could do a fellowship or you could do an internship or you could move back with your parents or you could live by yourself. And so people in their 20s just get so overwhelmed that they're like, oh, well, let me just take this job and like have it easy for a little bit and then I'll figure out what to do. But then you're constantly like playing catch up.
I want to argue that, and I think me and you've had this conversation / debate about, you know, people tend to think that like a full-time job is like you must have, right? It's a must have, male or female, you must have a full-time job 40 hours a week. But if it's not serving the purpose of your life, right, and going back to this idea of like your happiness, right? I mean, obviously, most of us need the full-time job to upkeep with bills,
especially nowadays,
financial, like whatever else, you know, there's so many things you have to invest in financially. So like, yeah, technically you should have a full-time job. Most of us in our 20s need it because we need to financially catch up, right? We need to pay the money into 401ks. We need to like
pay off the student debt,
pay off student loans.
What? Buy a home? You didn't start saving in kindergarten?
Right? You didn't buy one when you were 12.
It's like, oh, my bad. I'm sorry I didn't start saving in kindergarten.
Los terrenos, the land, you know, you didn't start paying that off. What? You know, so there's like so many things that we actually have to pay to like basically build, right, a successful life. The cars, right? Like so many of us have car payments. So there's like so much that we pay into credit cards, right? If
credit card
both
debt.
of us are guilty of that. Me, I'm guilty. But like there's so much you have to pay, right? So this idea of like you have to have a full-time job, that's again society's level of like keeping us under its thumb, right? Like we always need to have a full-time job. But I question whether or not that's the right thing for everybody. People who are looking at that as like, hey, I'm behind. Like, stop to ask yourself, are you behind, or is it just not that's what
society values?
Yes, but also like, is that even what you want?
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's true.
Are you running a race that you're not even, you don't even want to be part of, right?
Ooh, that's a good one, Bri.
Like, life is a marathon, right? But like, everybody has a different path to get to the end. So are you on the right track? Are you on the right trail? Or are you looking at that trail thinking, I'm supposed to be on this trail with the other people and they're way ahead of me. But hey, guess what? I actually have this shortcut and I have a different end goal, or my, you know, what is it called? My finish line is somewhere else. Like my finish line isn't there. It's somewhere else. So that's what I'm getting at is I feel like for people in their 20s who are like, I'm behind. I just, you know, I haven't had a full-time job. Like, do you need the full-time job? Are you sure that's what you want?
Yeah.
Maybe having a part-time job or freelancing or, you know, even owning your own business or whatever it is. Like we've talked about so many different ways that careers take off.
Yeah. Could be what's right. Yeah.
Could be what's right. But also like, make sure y'all paying y'all's credit cards and your bills. Like, I'm not saying like,
no, yeah,
take the part-time job if you can and if it's like working for what you need, but also like don't always feel like you're running a race that society's telling you have to run, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, it's like what I said. I feel like reading this chapter, I was like, this book, I don't even know if I want to finish it now. And I think that's the like hard part about this book is that there are like chapters where I read and I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm like not, you know, when you listen to a really, well, you don't know because you don't even listen to podcasts.
I do.
Sometimes when I listen to
podcasts,
just kidding. Sometimes when I listen to podcasts, I will literally be like nodding along and I'm like, yes, like I'm like agreeing, right?
Yeah.
So I was like reading some of the chapters in this book.
Have y'all seen those TikToks?
That's in the round table TikToks with all the girls. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I love
funny.
those.
Juan sends me them all the time. But anyway, so I feel like some of the chapters in this book, I was like, yes, 100%. And then some of them I was like, that made me depressed, or like, I don't know if I agree with that, or maybe that's not exactly the way I would have said stuff. It's like a hit or miss.
Yeah.
I think
it's a maybe.
I think take what you need from every book is what I always say. Like take what you need, leave what you don't, because I think this book is a good example. Like some of the chapters you're like, yes, 100%. I mean, some of them you're like, no.
Right? It's like a self-help book, right? So like when I'm thinking about this chapter, hopefully it motivates people that are there, that are wanting to have a full-time job, have a career,
be
the breadwinner of the family. Get your ass up and work, girl.
It's like nobody wants to work these days. We don't, Kim. We won't.
I don't. Like, I was thinking the other day, I said my boss hopefully never listens to this, but it's like, they were like,
what are your goals, right?
What are your goals? Like, it's year end, you know, you do your reviews. What are your goals? Like, you know, you're looking at this job as a career, not as a job. And I'm like, my goal is to get paid, girl. Like, you know, like, I just
no, it's like when I go to interviews and they're like, so like, what do you want from this job? And
this
I'm
idea
like,
of like 5-year plan, like 5 years from now, I want to be happy. I want to pay off my credit cards. You know, I want to, you know, live my life. I hope I have traveled a little bit longer. My goal isn't to fucking become president or CEO of this company. That's unrealistic for me.
Or even, I mean, it might not even be like staying there in 5 years. Like, girl, bye.
Right. Like, I mean, this idea of like staying somewhere for so long and building a career out of these things, I feel like is an old value of like old time. Like, don't get me wrong, I love my job, I love our company, it's great, but this idea of like people telling me like I'm gonna die here, like this is where I'm gonna be, it's just like that's a little that's a lot of commitment, my guy. Like, back it up, let's just talk about what I need to do now and maybe how I can improve here. Like,
I was thinking about that recently because, well, you know, I had an interview today, but it was with a place that I've worked at before. And like, I went into this was the second interview. I went into the first interview and realized that it was like all of the same people from 3 years ago. And they're still doing the exact same thing. The team hasn't really changed. And I was like, that's crazy that, not to say that it's wrong to stay in a place for a really long time. Like, if you love your job and like you're comfortable, whatever, right?
I think staying at a job is closer to, that's like the new 30s though. Like thinking about like, yeah, no, we're like talking about 20s, 30s, whatever, right? Like, I really do feel like in your 20s, you should be exploring careers or different jobs or different companies. Like, it helps you realize like where you want to be. I wouldn't say like start a job and stay at your job forever in your 20s, because if I were to start job hopping in my 30s, I wouldn't even know. Like, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so old. People are going to be like, what the fuck? But like in my 20s, I'm like, I'm 20. Like, you know, like, you're 20 or not. Like, I'm still young, right? So like when I take these jobs, a lot of the time I'm the youngest person in the room, and I'm like, this is great, because people are looking at me like, you're smart for your age. But like, if I get there when I'm 30, they're gonna be like,
what are you doing?
Yeah, like, keep up, girl. Why are you barely starting now? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, in my 20s, people are like, oh, this is just a baby, she's just learning. But like in my 30s, they're gonna be like, you a grown woman, like, come on, let's go.
Allison from After Some say, they're just a little cute baby. It's just a little baby.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm excited. I love being in this part of my development, because I feel like I'm okay with people looking at me and being like, she's just a child. She's a baby. She's a baby.
And I am a baby. And I'll always be a baby.
You know, I'm like, keep it coming. Like, I'm cool with that. Like, I want to be considered smart for my age. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Anyways, that was all of the work section of the book. That's the first section. The next one, love.
Oh.
Love.
Cue the romance music.
So this was a really long section. It was longer than the first section, which I thought was interesting.
Because love conquers all. Just kidding.
It talks a lot about marriage, getting married, finding the right partner, like that kind of stuff. So it's interesting to read now. It's just interesting to read now, because I'm like, this is, it's different.
You know, I think marriage, or just like relationships in general, is also something that's like really touchy. Like, people don't talk about it.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, like, other people who have read the book, how they feel about some of these chapters. But it starts off talking about people getting married older and older now, the average age of getting married and having children.
No, I'm just kidding.
And then the author talks about like different reasons for it. And so some of them are like decline in religious beliefs, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I mean, yeah, because, you know, like, people who are super religious believe like you have to start your family and you have to, like, you know, marry the right person, and you want to lose your virginity, right? Because technically people who believe in religion is like, you know, some people want to save it to marriage. Not everybody though. Like, so maybe that's part of it, right? Like, less people are waiting till marriage to have sex, so they're like, I'm already and, you know, the other concept, not just like having premarital sex, but like, you're also seeing a lot more couples move in prior to.
You're jumping ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll get there. The other reasons are couples living together before or despite being married, economic uncertainty, which makes sense.
Wait, so people aren't getting married because they're not financially stable?
Yes.
Okay.
And then unemployment or underemployment. So it talks about
you ain't getting married if you unemployed, baby.
it talks about people like they surveyed, I don't know how many people, and they all said that they didn't feel ready to get married until they had like a good job and had their finances in order and things like that. So different things like that. And then it kind of talks about how marriage has changed from being like a milestone to a capstone. And so
what is that? What's the difference between them?
So it used to be like, oh, you got married, congratulations, yay. But now it's like when people get married, they get married like after they've done a lot of stuff. So a lot of couples
like
are
your final.
Yes. Okay. Like a lot of couples are getting married after they lived together for a really long time, after they've maybe bought a house,
after they've had a baby,
after they've had a baby, after they've gotten like a really good paying job. And so this is like the final step in like the checklist, essentially.
That makes sense, actually. That really does resonate to some extent because I think about that.
This was one of those chapters where I was like, yeah. We're going to be saying this the whole episode and y'all are going to be skipping.
This is hilarious.
So I was like, I agree. It all makes sense. When you look at the numbers. When you look at the numbers, it made sense. I can't even talk now. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Anyways. And then it kind of shifts and it starts talking about when people start getting closer to their 30s. So like 29. 29?
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I can't say it without saying it. Shout out new girl. Anyways, when people get closer to their 30s, so like 29, they get married faster despite who they're with. Like it could be somebody that they're with and they're like, I don't, like maybe at 27, 28, they're like, we're never going to get married. And then once they hit 29, they're like, we got to get married tomorrow.
But why? Why does that happen?
Because they just feel like it's this like pivotal age that they're
like, if I don't do it now,
I'm never going to do it. Yes.
Oh my gosh, this is why your divorce rate is so high.
No, that's literally what she talks about. She talks about this client that comes in that she is in the middle of getting a divorce only like 2 months after getting married because she's like, yeah, he was a great like 20 something boyfriend, but he's not a great 30 something husband. And like,
hey, I mean, that makes sense. You're looking for different things in different stages of your life, so that makes sense.
Yes. So she talks about that and how a lot of the times people like rush into it when they're closer to the age of 30 because they're like, well, I have to get married. It's like a milestone that I have to hit. And they'll just marry somebody.
My missing puzzle piece. I just need to finish the puzzle. Max is sleeping so comfy right now. Like,
no, I'm pretty sure he's snoring too. So, which on the last episode, if you listen very closely, you can hear him in the background. And then it goes on to talk about this entire chapter of like picking your family, choosing your family. It talks about the breakdown that people don't think about, which this was another chapter.
Okay.
So essentially, when you think about choosing your family, what do you think about when you're getting married in terms of getting married?
Like your partner's family and like whether or not they're the right kind of support that you need in a marriage?
Yeah. So a lot of people think like your partner's family, like your in-laws, if you will.
Yeah.
But what you should be thinking about is like your partner, because when you get married, you form your own family. And so it's no longer like me, my mom, my siblings, my dad. It's like my partner and I are now a family.
Yeah.
And so people don't think about that when they get married or when they want to get married. And that's why they oftentimes like just get married really quickly. And then they're like, I don't even like this person. Like,
ooh, ouch.
Yeah. So it talks a lot about that. I can
never imagine marrying somebody I don't like though.
Well, she talked a lot about there was this whole chapter that I was like, ooh, I feel like she's anti moving in together before marriage. And this is where I feel like the book gets kind of outdated because she's like, people that move in together before marriage get a divorce, like high divorce rate. And I was like, I don't believe that's true.
What was her reasoning behind that? Like, why does she think that happens?
That you end up getting married because it's more comfortable because you've been living together for so long that like your lives are already so intertwined that getting married is like whatever to you. And that makes sense. And so it's harder to end that relationship, but it's easier to get married.
Okay.
But then you end up divorced. So then she's like, so you should have just ended the relationship.
Where I think.
Well, you don't always end up divorced, whatever. That's what she said.
Two things. I have two things to say to that.
Two things, Andrew. Two things.
2 points. Okay, first, I think that some of that makes sense. So I do think that if you're somebody who gets comfortable easy, it can be easier to just continue going than to like cut it out. But I think in general, when you're looking at these stats, I'd like to see what the differences between heterosexual and homosexual relationships are. The reason I say that is because I think they function very differently. I think homosexual relationships in general.
Just kidding. Go ahead.
Am I? In general, I think like in a same-sex marriage, you're going to be. I don't know why I was using homosexual. Like that's such an ugly. I feel like that's such a slur. But anyways, what I was gonna say was I just feel like it's different for same-sex marriage or same-sex couples than it is for like non-same-sex heterosexual
sex. Yeah.
So, anyways, that's my point.
Well, there's parts of this book where I feel like this was supposed to be an updated version, but like there's not much updating, if you will. And I wanted to see a chapter about like same-sex couples, and there wasn't. There was just like part of a chapter, and the part of the chapter talked about like expectations in a relationship. And she says
I remember you said that.
Yes, we talked about this, which I was like, I shouldn't be talking to you about it because then you like jump ahead.
Sorry.
She talks about,
hey, I'm a genius. I could read my own books.
She talks about this guy and like his girlfriend and whatever. And the point is that she says most of the time people in opposite sex, so like a straight presenting relationship, have more problems because they rely on unspoken gender norms.
Right.
So you would expect the man to be the breadwinner and you would expect the girl to be a homemaker. And so this example of this client that she's talking to, he's like, oh, I just expected more support from my partner and my girlfriend's not doing that. And then she's like, but your girlfriend literally said, like, I'm not going to do these things. I'm not your mom. And then she's
don't expect them.
Right. Like, why do you expect them if she's literally telling you I'm not going to do them? And then she talks about how most of the time same-sex couples have more conversations about how the workload is going to be divided, and heterosexual couples don't have those conversations.
Yeah, it's just kind of like an expectation. I think in general, I was going to say specifically with having kids, that's probably one of the biggest
that comes into play. Yeah, I think so too.
That becomes one of the reasons, because I think every same-sex couple has to think about, one, do we want kids, and two, if we are going to have them, like how do we have them, right? Like we have to kind of think that through before we even like get married or have kids.
Yeah. Whereas like if you're in a heterosexual relationship,
you just assume you're like, well, we're
like,
just gonna get pregnant, and that's fine.
Pregnant.
But then like they don't talk about like, well, what happens if we're infertile, right? What if right? Those are like big topics that like people just don't talk about. Like what happens if you can't have kids?
Right.
They don't know, right? They're like,
and I think reading this like part in the book made me think about it. Like some of it is subconscious. Like you don't even realize that those are like your, and it makes sense. Like if you grew up in a traditional family, you grew up with a mom and a dad, especially I think about my family, right? Like my dad worked, my mom stayed home.
Right.
So then you think about, okay, when I'm older, you expect the dad to go to work and the mom to stay home and watch the kids.
Right.
And so it's like, you
and
might
what if
not
she doesn't
even
want to? What if she wants to be the breadwinner? Yeah.
Exactly. And you might not even
especially
be doing
in
it
modern
like
day society
consciously. You just think like, and the guy in the book says that, like the client, he's like, well, my parents supported each other. And then she was like, well, what did that look like? And he said the same thing. Like, well, my mom stayed home, my dad worked, and my mom did X, Y, and Z.
But here's where I'll also like throw like a coin to the thing. It's just, we also need to start thinking about like how, where we come from like makes a difference, right? Because like you come from a very different family and I come
what
from
was
a very...
that?
No, just in general.
She said, you come from a different family.
I'm just saying like the expectations that you hold for yourself and for your partner are very different based on what kind of background you're coming from. Right? Very different because you have different expectations. And sometimes those are, like you said, biased. Like you're not even thinking about how this was something you were expecting from your partner. And you really have to kind of like realign your expectations as to like, you really one is understanding your partner, right? Is like,
I think also understanding yourself.
Yeah.
Like knowing your own biases and like thinking through that. And
just checking yourself. Because I think here's the main thing that I've learned.
Bring me to my next chapter.
Main thing I've learned about relationships and having a good relationship is not having expectations for your partner. Well, like, of course, you want to have standards. I said you want to have some standards, right? Like, you want them to still contribute and want the same things in life as you, you know? Like,
yeah, but the expectations are your own. They're not your partner's. And that's where people get...
Yes.
That was a good quote. I hate you.
Say it again for the crowd.
I don't know what I said. the expectations are your own and not your partner's. There
yes,
you go.
yes.
Well,
That's a
that
good
brings me to
takeaway.
the last chapter in this section, which is called 29 Conversations. I talked to you about this the other day.
Yeah.
And this was a really good chapter. She talks about how throughout your entire relationship with your partner, you're going to ask each other questions all the time, all day, every day. And
True.
there are specific questions that you should be asking your partner. There's 29 of them listed in the book that are listed in the book, and they each come with like a sub question too. So like there's a main question and then there's sub questions under that. And that these are questions that you should be having like before you even get engaged and before you get married. And what happens is that people don't. They wait to have these afterwards, and then they're like, "Oh, gotta get divorced
awkward
because my partner don't want kids or whatever the hell." I only wrote down a couple because I didn't want to read the book if you want all the questions. Some of them are, how are you going to manage your money? So finances.
Yeah.
Good talk.
See, and this is where I will argue with like her previous, what you said, like not moving in together. How do you talk about finances if you're not living together? Because like you talk about rent, you talk about electricity, you talk about Wi-Fi, like, you know, there's so many different bills that you have to talk about. So it like leads to this idea of like finances. Let's talk about it.
I think the whole chapter about living together was just like outdated. I was like, you should not put this in the updated version, girl. Like,
because like that's my real question. Like, how do you talk finances with somebody in a heterosexual relationship or same sex?
Learn their daily habits. And like she literally just said that heterosexual couples don't have these conversations about the workload and the house load and all of that stuff. And the only reason you're going to get there is if you're living with your partner. So I don't get that. Anyways.
I said heterosexual couples chime in because
we don't understand.
I don't know.
Anyways, another one is, do you want to have kids? And then this is a normal question. What kind of parents do you want to be, or what kind of parent do you want to be? And there was a bunch of sub questions underneath that about like, do you want to raise your kids religious? Like, do you believe in different things? Blah, blah, blah. So that one was a good one. This one was really good. Like, what standard of living do you imagine having? And the sub questions were about like, you know, are you somebody that likes to eat out a lot? Are you somebody that likes a life of luxury? Do you expect your partner to make more money than you? Like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That one's a good one.
I mean, I've heard that last question, like do you expect, like, I feel like a lot of women go into these relationships and then they're like resentful towards a man because they're not making enough money or more money than them. So then they feel like they're the breadwinners, but they have this this bias, right? Of like a man is the breadwinner and they're not making it.
That is not the partner's expectation.
Exactly. So anyways, I think that's like a big one.
That's a good one.
That's a big one.
A lot of sub questions. Where do you want to live? How important is travel to you? And then this one we talked about the other day, me and you. It was, how will you spend your free time? And it was talking about like alone time, hobbies, like things like that, which some people, the author talked about, like some people thought that question wasn't important, but then realistically, when you actually break it down, it is kind of important. And the example I think was, if you're somebody who likes to have people over a lot and your partner's not.
No, because I mean, I'm not going to call a couple out, but I think about, this one couple that we know that I feel like one is like a super introvert and the other one's like a super extrovert. And I'm like, how does that work?
Yeah,
you know,
I don't know.
They spend their time very differently. So I'm like, how does that marriage work? You know?
And it talks about I think one of the sub questions under that was like alone time. Like, how much alone time do you need? Because that is like, we were talking about that too, you know, like based on what we do throughout the week kind of determines how much alone time we want.
Or get.
And then sometimes Bri was like, she requires more because she's, you know, in a lot of meetings all day versus me. I'm not in a lot of meetings all day. So I don't need as much alone time because I already have it.
And then like one big difference that we have, which I mean, we've worked through, right? Obviously, but you're big, I want to watch TV.
Yes.
Right? You want to like,
I'm a big TV whore.
That's your free time. Like I want to do that. We both enjoy reading books, which has been great because it's kind of like alone time, but we're like still spending time together. I personally, I like the TV on, but it's not like my preferred spend my time alone. My preferred time alone is music playing and me doing something physical, right?
Yeah,
whether that's mowing my lawn, whether that's playing with my plants, not playing with them, but watering them.
Yeah.
So because of me being ADHD, right, I have to be physically doing something to really be enjoying myself because of the fact that I just like, it's not that I can't sit still, it's just that like my mind wanders too easily when I'm not doing something with my hands. Or
I said I spent a week with Bri's family over Thanksgiving and they're all like this. It's very different. And I think we've gotten like a good medium too. Like there are times where she's like, I have to go mow the lawn. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna watch a movie. And I'm like literally sitting on the couch. I will not get up because I'm like, that to me is, I have to do that to recharge. And Bri has to go mow the lawn to feel like
I got something done.
Yeah,
Something was
she's
done.
recharged.
Mentally, that's taking something off my load. It's free time for me, self-care. I was actually like, I read something or saw something on TikTok the other day that literally said that was like, self-care for ADHD people is very different than most
self-care
people
for everybody else. Yeah.
Because self-care for us is literally like checking a box off of this unspoken list that's constantly going on in our mind. And it's, taking care of that mental load rather than like our physical self.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
And I'm not like that. Wow, like I totally need a lot of like rot time. I need
Don't
to
get me wrong, I enjoy
turn my brain off.
But
yeah.
like the TikTok,
very different.
I could rot there all day most of the time.
God, I spend way too much time on there. Well, those were some of the questions. There's a lot of other ones. There's like stuff about religion, political views, stuff about I think it was like finances. There was another one about finances. There's a lot. So 29 questions in total. Each one of them comes with a subset of questions. And she was talking about suggesting that you should be like scheduling time into your week to like talk about one of these questions or sets of questions.
Yeah.
If you're like thinking about getting married to this person.
It's interesting to hear her say like schedule these times because it also goes back to this idea of like religion declining because I think back in the day like marriage counseling was really big.
Yes. Yeah.
So like you would do per se, right? Like these 29 questions in marriage counseling so that before you got married, you were ready. Like you had already had those conversations.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Versus like now,
we don't do that.
Nobody
We
does.
just go and get married.
Yeah.
And then we're like, oh my God, you don't have kids. This is so awkward. Now we got a divorce.
I don't even think it's just kids nowadays. Like it's so like
just
there's so many questions you mentioned to me while reading the book.
Or like
too.
money's a really big one.
I mean, I know that's a big one because I feel like
I think the big one too was like where you want to live. And like some of the sub questions were like, well, what type of place do you want to live in? Like apartment, house, different things like that. But also like, do you want to live near your family? Do you mind living near my family? Like, and then like weather, like what type of weather do you like? And I'm like, those are all really good things to think about that you think, like,
yeah, because people assume like if you're here, you're gonna always be here. Yeah.
And then these are kind of things that you think, oh, we'll just like talk about that eventually. And like me and Bri, we're big yappers. So we've talked about like every question on the list.
Yeah.
But other people are not yappers.
Like I think about sometimes, especially for this idea of not living together ahead of time is like how involved do you want your family to be?
Yes.
Because some people are like, some people are like really big family people, So then that can also impede into your relationship based on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Like you have people wanting to move in-laws into their
home and the other person's like, what the hell?
Yeah, and they're like, what the fuck? Like, how are we supposed to live our lives? There's this idea of like, how involved do you want your parents to be in our kids' lives? That's a big one because then you have kids and then you have grandparents, raising these kids and they're raising them wrong, right? Or they're like doing things that the other partner's not comfortable with. So that's like another issue. And like, these aren't things people normally talk about.
Yeah. And I think that's also under the, what type of parent do you want to be?
Right.
Things like that you don't consider like biases or subconscious beliefs. That could be your belief, but that could not be your partner's belief. So where do you meet in the middle? Or is this somebody that you want to meet in the middle with? Or do you just want to go and like find somebody else?
Having these conversations, I think also like allows you to know, like kind of like what you said, like what's your expectation for the life? Like what's your
own life,
your standards, right?
Yeah, there were some, I think it's like where do you see yourself in 5 years or something? And then it was also like type of career, like what type of career do you see yourself in? Do you want to work full time? Do you want to work part time? Are you somebody that wants to stay home?
Like I think about, or like even so, and I'll bring this up because I feel like it might be a big one for some people. People who work jobs like a nurse, who work really difficult hours, really early, really late, really long shifts, talking about how that looks for your relationship, for your kids, right? For other things. People don't have those conversations. And then you have these really difficult jobs where you're working really long hours or, like some people travel. If you're in and out traveling every week because it's work, how does that look for you?
Questions. Anyways, that was the last chapter and section of the first section. The second section of the book, I think it's called The Brain and the Body. And I've already started it. Okay. So far, so good. I think my goal with these whole book club episodes is like, do I recommend the book or not? And I think I'm leaning towards yes. I feel like what I said is some chapters I don't agree with, but overall, I think it's still a good book to read. If you're in your 20s, whether you're in your mid, early, or late 20s, if you're in your late 20s, I think just going in with like the knowledge that it might not all relate to you, or like some of that is past or behind you.
I think just based on like what you're telling me, it sounds like this would be really good for an early 20s read.
Yeah.
Even a mid 20s.
Early to mid 20s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think if you're in your late 20s, like if you're going to read it with caution. Because I think some of it is behind you. Like you're obviously never going to get that first job again. And like you can't go back in time and fix that, fix your early career days. So some of those chapters are not unrelatable, but they don't apply to you, you know? So, so yeah, we are going to release the second part of this episode, or like part 2 for the book, either as a full episode or a bonus episode. We haven't decided yet, but if you guys like this type of content, please make sure to let us know. We would also love to hear your book recommendations that you want us to review and read.
Yeah.
There's so many out there that are like self-help or in your 20s books, and I'm all about reading. Send us your recommendations. I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who sent us screenshots that we were on your Spotify Wrapped this year. Woo-hoo. We are so excited, and like, I can't believe we were a top podcast for some people. That just blows my mind. So yeah, we appreciate you guys listening.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you guys next episode.
Bye, guys.
Bye.